Good morning. I'm Bob Mortlock. I'm the Principal Investigator of the Acquisition Research Program, ARP. And on behalf of ARP, I'd like to welcome you to the 20th Annual Acquisition Research Symposium. This is the first hybrid symposium, combining both the advantages of our in-resident and the advantages and benefits of a virtual event. This year's event has over 700 registered participants, including senior leaders, researchers, acquisition professionals, warfighters, policymakers across government, academia, and industry, all sharing their thoughts and perspectives and highlighting the impact of applied research in the acquisition sciences, things from program management, contracting, financial management, logistics, engineering, cost estimating, the integration and management of emerging technologies into warfighting systems, helping bridge that valley of death and delivering capability to the hands of our warfighters at the speed of relevance. Please take an opportunity over the next 2 days to engage both the senior leaders and the researchers and ask them the hard questions. Ask them the so what of their research. I think you'll be both impressed and inspired by the answers. I'd like to recognize the generous support of ARP by both the Office of the Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, ASNRDA, through the Navy Director of Acquisition Talent Management, the DATM Office, and PEO Integrated Warfare Systems. This year's symposium is co-sponsored by the Naval Warfare Studies Institute, NWSI, and the NPS Foundation. And I'd like to highlight that the refreshments, the lunches, and the student poster session food is all compliments of the NPS Foundation. When you get a chance, please recognize and introduce yourself to the Foundation President, Rich Patterson, or the Foundation Vice President, Todd Lyons. This year's symposium is a result of 6-month planning effort by the ARP team. It's a small team, and they work tirelessly, led by the PM, Carrie Schaefer, the Chair of Acquisition, Vice Admiral Dave Lewis, the ARP Communications Manager, Dr. Shell Johnson, and the two folks that work really hard, Nadia Greer and Joshelle Benson. Throughout the next 2 days, please take time to thank them for their tireless efforts to make this symposium run smoothly and be a success that I'm sure it will be. I do have a couple of administrative things to cover, or Carrie will knock me across the head. So bathrooms are across the atrium or to the left. Presenters, if you have any problems, the presenters, the researchers, just look for someone in a black shirt at the end of the rooms and they'll help you. Please keep your research talks to help your chairs out and keep them less than 15 minutes long. There's a non-attribution policy, so please feel free to talk and start the dialogue and keep it in here. The poster session this evening, the student poster session, I'd like to invite everyone to that. It's a real highlight of the event, and please enjoy that. This event is about you all, so we take your feedback very seriously. There's feedback cards in your welcome packet. Please fill those out, and we will look at them and try to improve our event next year. For the plenary session and the keynote speaker, we will be collecting the questions. There's no cards on your chairs. Just write down your question. Someone will collect them, and we'll bring them up front. And we'll try to get as many questions into the keynote speaker and the plenary session. And then finally, you'll hear the chimes each time when the sessions start to begin, and that's your indication to go into whatever session you're trying to go into after we split up this big room into red, white, and blue rooms. And now, at this time, I'd like to welcome the President of NPS, Vice Admiral Anne Rondeau, for symposium opening remarks. Yeah.
And a very good morning to all on this 20th anniversary of this acquisition research symposium. It's great to have all of you who are here in body and those who are also here virtually. It's great to have you here. I do want to thank again Carrie Schaefer and Bob Mortlock. If you were in my office yesterday, You heard Bob Mortlock's passion about this. And Bob, I want to thank you for your leadership and your passion with acquisition. It's great. So thank you very much. We also, of course, miss one of our great leaders in this, and that is Rear Admiral Jim Green. And Jim left us with a rich legacy of interest in all of this. When I first met Jim, when I first got to this job at NPS, there were two important things that Jim wanted to let me know. One is about the importance of acquisition research, and the importance of this to warfighting. The second was how good he was as a fisherman. So, and he showed pictures of his fish that were mounted up on the wall. So I want to thank the fact that Jim Green's spirit is here, and we do appreciate his legacy over time. I also want to acknowledge the NPS Foundation and the Naval Warfare Studies Institute, so that you may know and be able to talk to folks as you interact in this event. I'd like to have Todd Lyons and Randy Pugh please stand up. So Todd is with the foundation. Randy is also with the foundation. Came there from the NWSI leadership role. Two very smart warfighters, even though they are Marines. And but I want to thank Todd and Randy for what they've done to advance us in many ways. They are working with industry. They're working with all of the guidance and our warfighters. So talk to them at a break, and they'll tell you all about what they're doing. So thanks, guys. Okay, so we have been doing this for 20 years. Bob yesterday talked about the speed of relevance, and that we're trying to deliver capability at the speed of relevance. The problem today is that relevance is always pacing ahead of us. So how do you get to an acquisition process and strategy that on the one hand takes care of the strategic acquisition requirements of building a submarine, and yet also takes care of the acquisition requirements that are all about unmanned systems and data and the fast world of those things that are not so much brick and mortar or steel and metal and wires, but all about the things that are in space and swirling around us. And if in the brutality of Ukraine, we've learned nothing else, it's about things like supply chain, ammunition, acquisition, how do you deliver to the front lines warfighting capability. So I would challenge you to do what Bob said. When you hear these research projects, please ask questions, challenge assumptions, challenge the work and the analysis. Because if we're not doing that, this is the opportunity to do it. And if we're not, nobody else has time to do it. So this is a kind of a place, an opportunity to spend that time doing this. And if you don't think that it's being heard, let me also emphasize something else about the importance of this dialogue. We at NPS are very committed to not only the science of acquisition, led by people like Vice Admiral retired Dave Lewis and Vice Admiral retired Terry Blake. Now, please stand up to Terry so they all can. Yeah, okay. So not only them, but also the other leaders here that have really been working hard to bring this forward to the Pentagon, to bring this forward to the warfighter. And these kinds of leaders have been doing this for a while. But we also have some other things going on at NPS, not only the acquisition science, but also some extraordinary new ways of doing these things to integrate and to bring together not only one type of the science, but other types. So let me tell you about an initiative we've got going on. So Ray Jones, if you would please stand up, and Jeff Dunlap, and let people know who you are, and just stay standing for a moment. These leaders are focused on moving capability and the technology for warfighters. Okay, guys, you can sit down for. Because now I want you to see them. Because they have made some really great initiatives happening, not just about looking at the processes of acquisition, but the innovation that goes along with acquisition. I want you to talk to them at breaks. So they are advancing forward on how to think about speed and relevance. Remember, in my view, relevance always moves ahead of the capability. How do you anticipate that, plan for that, and acquire that, and not make a mistake? Not waste taxpayer dollars or warfighter requirements. So what they have done is that Ray has set up an innovation capstone initiative out of the Department of Defense Management. And they are really working that they can think about innovation in new ways. So let me tell you an example of this. Is Austin Dumas here by any chance? Or Hans Lawson or Dan Lim yet? Okay, these are three students. These are three students. Austin Dumas, SEAL, double major in space operations and space engineering. Hans Lawson, an IW officer and a former SWO. And then Dan Lim, also a double major in acquisition and in space engineering. They're working together. You'll see them today to think about the innovation and acquisition for capability using all manner of backgrounds. This is what we're doing at NPS. So I stop here with, again, and passion and enthusiasm for what we can do here. And I ask you to ask questions and engage, and be sure that when we leave here, there's an answer to delivering warfighting capability at the speed of relevance. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My job now is to introduce our principal speaker. In the entertainment business, the exemplar for achievement and performance is called a triple threat. They can sing, they can dance, and they can act. Dr. LaPlante is the acquisition version of a triple threat. He is a senior leader, he is a practitioner, and he is a theater, he does theory. Okay, and he does them all well. He has done them all well throughout his professional life. He is a long-term participant and friend of this symposium and the ARP program. So it's really my pleasure to introduce him. He's been confirmed at a critical time, and he's exactly the right person to be in the job he's in during these challenging times. You all have his bio, so you got all the details there. So with that, Dr. LaPlante, over to you.
Good morning to all of you, and thank you to Admiral Rondeau, Admiral Lewis, Dr. Mortlock, and the rest of NPS staff. And like I said, I've been out there for this exact event. I think we did it. I did it when I was an 809 Section 809 commissioner, and it's a great event. And so thank you for holding this as always. Thank you for the work you do and the research and the data-driven empiricism that the research that you bring to the acquisition. So anyway, I'll intend to talk for maybe about 20 minutes and then turn it over. I think if David Berteau is on, or for questions for everybody. And so again, thank you for having me. I'm going to start by talking at the big level of the threat environment and the national defense strategy, which shouldn't be a surprise at all for this audience. Clearly, we're seeing it every day. The threat environment is evolving, and it really is evolving faster than I think we've seen in the last several decades. The pacing challenge for the country and for our allies and partners is China. That we cannot forget that. That is something the Secretary reminds us, despite everything we're doing with helping Ukraine and all the rest of the hard work going on. We have to remind ourselves that the long term, the pacing challenge is China. Having said that, of course, we see that Russia is very, very dangerous right now. And that, of course, we're learning a lot from Ukraine, as the introduction said. in the national defense strategy, there's three components of it that are advancing goals that acquisition fits right into. One is integrated deterrence. And think about, I often say that going into production and showing you can surge production lines is actually a deterrent. There's much more to it than an acquisition than that, but it's the fact that we can field things that are advanced, the fact that we fielded the B-21 or the rollout of B-21, that actually is part of deterrence. So there's lots of that that's covered in our community. Second is campaigning. And I think this is actually really important. Campaigning is defined as a series of related events towards a longer term outcome. And my personal view on campaigning and why it's important is, as we've watched, many of us have watched China over the last 20 years, it seemed clear that they were doing things not as a one-off. They were doing things in a combined, consistent event. If you think of the Belt and Road Initiative as an example, or think of what they've done on critical minerals and the like. And we, on the United States, arguably were not. We were not doing move, counter move. We were with China, we were just very focused on things like Iraq and Afghanistan, other things. So getting to a campaigning approach is very, very important. And for those of you that like to read, one of my favorite books in acquisition is Dave Albert's Campaigning of Experimentation. And that book is a great book in explaining why experimentation needs to be in campaigns, not do one-off. So campaigning is really important to what we do in acquisition. And of course, building enduring advantages. We don't want a fair fight. We want to have enduring advantages. And that, of course, involves the advantage the United States has on partners and allies. So the acquisition system is only about really delivering capability to a warfighter and sustaining it. That's what our system is. It must be able to deliver these capabilities quickly, but also at scale. We talked about the speed of relevance in the introduction, and thank you, but it also has to be at scale. Numbers matter, as we see in Ukraine. So let me just shift a little bit into what I'm calling the acquisition innovation. And really, I think where we are in 2023 is given a lot of the authorities and experience that's been gained, and through the help of the NPS as part of this, we've got new acquisition tools that are really being used. The most well-known ones that are being used is so-called mid-tier acquisition, Section 804. There's two components to Section 804. One is delivering an operational prototype, and the second is actually going quickly into production. Both of those are being used right now across the DoD. The second, and one that's close to my heart, is a software pathway, which a lot of that came out of the work that we did on the Defense Science Board and also Defense Innovation Board, that said modern software development is different. It's not, you don't do the old waterfall way where you take and do development, then you go to procurement, sustainment, and three different colors of money. Modern software development is just that, continuous development. This pathway is being used to make that happen. Of course, we've had the proliferation of other transactional authority, which has been around for a long time, but particularly since about 2015, 2016, it's really being used much more frequently, and I think largely to good effect. I mean, we're still learning a lot from it. In all of these cases, and then we've got, of course, acquisition of services, which are more and more, they're as much as ever, but there are more and more really innovative ways of using services. Reminding people, we purchase space launch as a service. We're actually right now experimenting with purchasing counter UAS as a service and finding what the pros and cons to that are. And of course, you have major capability acquisitions, the more classic ACAT 1, 2s, and 3s. And they're regardless of the tool, and they're all appropriate in certain circumstances. You really always have to think of the end product, what you're trying to do. And what I've been really hitting on in the last 6 months or so, not because we hadn't known this, but to remind all of us, especially those of us in the innovation part, which is in the development or even the pre-development phase of concept exploration, we have to get these things to production. Not everything deserves to go to production and shouldn't, but if nothing goes to production, it doesn't matter. And so we're having to relearn the production skill set, which is a different skill set, both for the supply chain and the industrial base and how we contract, than the skill set for doing, let's say, front-end R&D or S&Ts. Very different skill set, or even different from sustainment. So this is really where I try to put my attention there. And then the other piece of it is engineering, design, and technology and the way we build things is changing. It's not just hype. There is hype, there always is hype, but there's real changes happening in digital and so-called digital engineering and in advanced manufacturing. Most of them have been, I always like to ask, where are the changes coming from? It's not a new idea. What's changed is the access to high-powered computing and ubiquity of cloud. That has really changed how we can do digital engineering and the use of software. We can do things in engineering and collapse even design times down. And additive manufacturing really is changing the ballgame. It's not just a novelty thing that you would do models for, which it was 7 or 8 years ago. It is actually going into airplane engines. It's going into automobiles. It's showing whole different ways of doing materials work on hypersonics. And what I'm really trying to push is where I think commercial space has been going, which is collapsing the design phase, where you're doing the digital engineering with the advanced manufacturing, think of them together and iterate back and forth between them, because you can really start to see some promise, and particularly some of the commercially derived space satellites, where we're collapsing the design and production into 3 years. I think it's where the car companies are going, and it's a lot of exciting. So that's acquisition innovation. And that's what we're looking for. And we're also looking for data on these things. This is where I need your help, is we want the data, and we're collecting the data on how are the OTAs working? How many of these MTAs, Section 804s, are transitioning? What are the production rates? Are the production rates truly going up? How are we fixing the supply chain? Data-driven analytics on all those things is sorely needed, and get away from anecdotes. And I know that audience would agree with that. The next thing I want to mention real quick is something that is also near and dear to my heart, which I think was really introduced at scale in the Section 809 Commission. And if you haven't seen it, there's a recent Atlantic Council report that just came out, interim report, which also emphasizes it. That's portfolio management. And here's how I like to think about it. We have a three-legged stool to develop and produce capabilities. And there are 3 different processes. One leg, of course, is acquisition, which is the acquisition strategy, the technology development, maturing the technology, the design, getting into manufacturing, all the contracting with it, and the sustainment. That's just one leg of the stool. There's 2 other really important legs. One of them is requirements. Requirements have to be done well. They have to be done accurately. They have to be something we can build to. They actually should be fixed sometimes. Sometimes they should change. In software development, you could argue the requirements in Agile are often evolve, and that actually works in Agile software. In other things, you don't want to change requirements. We really set the requirements very firm, for example, for B21 and for KC46. But that requirements process is really important. And then the third leg, of course, is the resources, the money, the color of the money, the phasing of the money. Is the money funded to the correct cost estimate? So for those 3 legs, if any one of those legs is out of sync or in trouble, you're not going to get the capability. It's that simple. And when we have seen successful acquisitions, in my opinion, we call it different things, you'll see that those 3 legs are working in synchronous, they're synchronized, and they're moving together, and they're highly coordinated. That is portfolio management in part. The second piece of it is, don't just look at individual systems as a platform or a capability of a program in its isolation. We have to do that. We have to manage cost, schedule, performance for the individual program. We all get that. In fact, our program managers are trained classically to avoid external dependencies, because therefore they have more control over keeping cost, schedule, performance. However, we don't fight that way. We fight by the kill chain. And our adversaries fight by their kill chain. We have to look at things through the kill chain, whatever you want to call the kill chain. For kinetic, it's a classic detect, control, engage. You can draw up cyber kill chains. Sometimes people call them, it's a lattice, not just a linear process. And so what we're doing is we're actually, in addition to managing the individual programs, which is largely in the services now, we in ANS are bringing in portfolios across the services, and we're looking at the kill chain. And we're looking at those 3 legs of the stool. Are the requirements laying flat? Is the money in the right place? And is the act strategy good? And then how it connects to the next part of the kill chain holistically, because that's how we're going to fight. And when you look at the kill chain and you look at those three legs, that's when the obvious issues jump out at you, and then you know where to work. That's what really we're doing right now, and it's very exciting. We're also aligning the portfolios that we're reviewing in A&S for the department are the same portfolios that the JROC is reviewing from a requirements perspective. And they're going to be the same portfolios that the tech roadmaps from R&E and the labs are going to be put together for. So we're all syncing up. And again, I think you're going to see more of this as we move forward. Again, these are all lessons that we've learned. Right now, to show people about the three legs and how the three legs of the stool can actually be actively managed for success, we've got something called competitive advantage pathfinders, which are 6 examples that are underway that are key to the high-end fight that's accelerating delivery by somewhere between 2 and 4 years. And I say delivery, I mean to the warfighter at scale. And what we're doing is we're bringing together at the deputy secretary the requirements people, the money people, and us acquisition people, and we're moving things to the left, and we're doing it without adding money. Sometimes we have to rephase money. And we're showing people that if you look at the 3 legs of the stool in your service at the lower levels, you can get so much more done. I often said when I was Air Force acquisition executive, that was why the Air Force RCO was and still is so successful, because they had tight control over those 3 legs of the stool, and they had leadership support to move across those 3 legs in an agile fashion. We're teaching the department how to do that. And we're on the second sprint of these pathfinders. One of the ones that we did in the first were largely around kill chains, fixing kill chains and attacking adversary kill chains. The ones we're doing now in the second sprint are about contested logistics. Think of the Indo-PACOM scenario, cyber survivability, and others. And again, we'll be rolling these out to show people. It's to show people by doing that this stuff really works. Let me go to the next chart here, please, for just a second, my notes. Next point. Now, of course, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the industrial base, resilience, and Ukraine. A strong, secure, and resilient industrial base, of course, is critical, and you won't have innovation or deterrence without these, and you won't have it without production lines. You simply will not have it. And the production lines have to be active, they have to be healthy, they have to have redundancies, they can't have critical nodes, and all the rest of it. What we've learned from Ukraine, which is really the first high volume fight we've seen in decades, and we're seeing incredible innovation on the battlefield. What the Ukrainians are doing with equipment that we're giving them and others, how they're connecting different pieces together is remarkable. I can just tell you, I use one example that is public, but we've got many others that hopefully someday we'll be able to make public. The example that we made public was the Harpoon example. It was one of our European allies had ship-based harpoons that they said they wanted to get past to the next generation of anti-ship weapons. So think of these as anti-ship weapons that were containerized on a ship right now. They offered them up to us and the Ukrainians. So we looked at it and we worked with the contractor and the country to take them off of the naval platform, put them on flatbed trucks, bring another flatbed truck for each of the batteries that does the power source, connect them together with power cords and other connections, and then train the Ukrainians on them, and then the Ukrainians were using them. That whole cycle, what I just said, happened within 4 weeks. 4 weeks. Okay, and we've got example after example of other things like that that we are doing with them right now. And it just shows you it's remarkable what innovation can happen. And by the way, what we've also learned from Ukraine is rapid contracting can be done. Rapid contracting can be done. There's no excuse to have contracting take months or years. So what we've done is during COVID, the DoD did most of the contracting for what we all saw during COVID the government was doing, whether it was masks, ventilators, production lines for the vaccines. It was done through the Defense Production Act. The face of it was HHS. The contracting was done by the DoD and the Army. By that contracting team was doing rapid contracting with COVID. We stood them back up again at the beginning of Ukraine, and now they're working night and day getting all these contracts out. And we put on contract just in the last year, over $10 billion on contract working that was not even planned in February of 2022. So we're learning a lot about this, but it also requires leadership attention. But you can move very, very fast. And we are doing that. And of course, what we're also learning is what I call production diplomacy. We are working very closely with the national armaments directors. Think of them as my equivalents, not just with NATO, but with the 40 to 50 countries that are part of the Ukraine contact group. We're in contact with them every week, sharing lessons learned, working together on long-range fires, air defenses, ground forces, air to ground, and most importantly, logistics. The United States is leading a lot of the logistics work across those countries to make sure that the spare parts, the training, the manuals are all there and ready to go. So it's been an incredible activity, and I call it production diplomacy that is going on. So the acquisition system does work. It does work. It takes attention and focus, but it does work. So now we have to think about the future. We have prioritized over time in the industrial base. We all know it, efficiency and cost savings over resiliency. A lot of this I've often said, I remember getting lectures about this back when on the Defense Science Board, that we needed to adopt the Walmart model in the DoD, the just-in-time delivery, driven by a very strong IT system. If you can have a really strong centralized enterprise IT system, you can do just-in-time delivery, minimize inventories, and drive your costs down. Well, that's great until something bad happens. COVID, war, everything else. And we've paid a price for it. And so we're having to rebuild that back into our industrial base, which is minimize redundancies, not just do just-in-time delivery, start buying up spares, start to look at the production time. It sounds like sometimes it takes really long to produce, let's say, a Javelin. A year and a half is the number people say. Well, actually, it's because you have to buy the long lead items and you have to do a lot of things in advance. If you actually looked at it from a compressibility perspective, meaning if I snap my fingers, I had everything on hand that I needed, I could potentially compress that to maybe a month or two. Now, we can't do that for everything, but we're looking at doing that to allow us to surge and allow us to get production back up in certain areas. And again, this is all part of integrated deterrence. And so we're also looking about what does it mean to do a surge capability. And Congress has been extraordinarily helpful. And the final piece, of course, is we convinced folks that buying munitions 1 year at a time, which was good from having what I would call liquidity in the budgeting accounts, actually was causing problems because in industry, particularly the suppliers, they knew that even although this year we're buying a lot of a certain munition, it could just as easily go away next year. We saw this after 9/11, where there was a surge of precision munitions and it stopped. We saw it in the ISIS campaign for Hellfires. We have a habit of shutting down production lines and using that money, 1 year money, for all the other reasons in the budget. And of course, it hasn't helped that we've been in continuing resolutions and sequester. Well, we said we're going to stop that. For munitions, particularly where it makes sense, and we've got the Congress to put it in law and the appropriators to help us. We've got approval to go as much as 17 different munitions and capabilities that we can go to multi-year. We're probably not going to do all 17, but we'll probably do close to 10. And these are things that are not just relevant for replenishment given the Ukraine situation, but they're also relevant for the Indo-Pacific. And that's happening as we speak. Will we get cost savings by doing multi-year contracting? Yes, but more important even than the cost savings is it sends a very strong signal to industry as well as the suppliers, and more importantly, their investors and their boards, that you can invest in this. There's much more surety from the government that we will buy these things. And we think that we're doing this to also encourage industry to use their CapEx as well. So this has all been going on. It's all lessons we've learned. And we must continue to do this together with allies and partners. And I said, I really believe that it's something we're calling production diplomacy. So just wrapping up here, we must have these high-end capabilities. They must be relevant for the fight on the high end, but they must be fast, developed fast. They have to be at scale. And we also have to remember to bring along what I call the .mil PF. Training matters. We're seeing that with Ukraine. If they can't train, or it takes them 6 months to train on it, or 2 years, and we have to have people with them to do it, That is not an effective system as the ones where it's much more plug and play. And that's the same for US forces. Training matters, sustainment matters, spare parts matter, logistics matter, particularly contested logistics. And in the Indo-Pacific scenario, we know our logistics are going to be contested, including our fuel supply and everything else. This is a no-fail mission for the department, the services industry, and academia, and all of us. And we really, really encourage your help, your ideas, your intellectual capital, your research. And again, I'll stop at this point and take questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. And we'll be collecting the questions. I'm monitoring the questions online, and I don't see any online right now. So if you have questions, please write them down as legibly as possible, please. And they'll be brought forward to me, and we'll go through them. So I have a few already, and we'll start with those, sir. You mentioned big A acquisition, requirements, management, and resourcing. And this question has to do with big A acquisition. Do you have any information on the PPBE, Planning, Programming, Budgeting, and Execution System Reform Panel? And do you expect any major changes from that panel?
Well, thank you for the question. And just one little footnote. I used the term big A acquisition when I came into this job a year ago. And I had a few of my acquisition veterans come up to me quietly and say, don't use that term. I said, why? Everybody uses that term. He said, no, because when you say big A acquisition, people think that when there's a problem, they think it's an acquisition problem, when it may be a budgeting problem or maybe a requirements problem. So I've been using three legs of the stool. Now you all can decide whether you want to use big A acquisition or not, but you know, where I grew up, we called it big A acquisition, but that's just a feedback for all of you. PBBE Commission, I know they're working hard. They've got great people on it. I've met with them, I think, several times. I know many people have met with them. We're showing them these CAPS initiatives to show them this is what you all have to help us with, because we've got to be able to move across funding and years and all this. The CAPS initiatives that we're doing are ones where we largely control it ourselves. But wouldn't it be nice if we could have that agility in the budgeting process on larger initiatives across a portfolio? That's what needs to happen. And you know, I think the Air Force, Mr. Kendall, just announced this idea, which we completely agree with, about getting money to start things faster. There's a famous chart that was used actually my first confirmation hearing in 2014 that came from DARPA that allegedly showed acquisition time for development over time, meaning the x-axis was years. Many of you have seen it. And it's got two lines on it at different slopes. And it basically says for jets or fighters, we were pretty fast in developing planes. And then somewhere we hit an inflection point, maybe about 2000, maybe 95, where all of a sudden the time to produce an airplane just shoots way up. And of course, we've all seen that chart. There's a comparable chart that was done for ground vehicles. And then they compare them to, say, commercial cars or commercial planes. Well, here's an interesting point that I did not know about that chart. When I asked them, because there was a paper done by Morgan Dwyer, some of you may have seen, that analyzed development times. And she concluded at CSIS, she's now in the government, that actually development times, B to C, were 5 to 7 years and have been pretty much 5 to 7 years, maybe since 1960. And so I said, well, how does that jive with those famous DARPA charts? Well, I talked to one of the persons who actually put those charts together. And I said, what did you start time for this? Oh, it was the first contract. So you went from the first contract to when the thing was finished. Sure, I could see that. Could the contract be for a prototype? Could it be for R&D, S&T? Yeah. Well, okay. Well, if I were to do that for hypersonics, for example, we haven't produced in production hypersonics. We've had contracts for hypersonics for 60 years. I mean, it's interesting to look at it that way, but that's actually not as meaningful. But it may give insight into the PBBE, because in fact, if it takes us that long to go from prototyping and playing around with something, doing AOAs, stopping and starting, before we, no kidding, actually go into a real EMD, that matters. And if that's where the problem is, and I think it's part of it, that matters. All of this has been conveyed to the commission. I think the issue going to be for the commission is, what are they going to be able to do on the appropriation side? Are we going to be able to get more flexibility from the Congress on the appropriation side? And I think there, I'm not going to make predictions. We're all eagerly waiting, but I will say they've got great people on that commission. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question has to do with the industrial base. You mentioned, and you've mentioned in the past, production is deterrence. And so this question has to do with what role does ANS have in shaping the industrial base strategy moving forward, leveraging lessons learned from the Ukraine conflict, i.e. building redundancy, intentionally spending more resources to build capacity and capability, maybe above what the program's acquisition baseline or acquisition objective is?
Yeah, the simple statement of the answer to the question doesn't mean it's an easy answer, but the simple answer is ANS owns the overall industrial base strategy for the United States defense, national security. We own that. And we're putting it together as we speak in light of everything we've learned. And it's going to emphasize resiliency and define resiliency in these different elements of resiliency. And then we're going to put investments against it to build it back. That's as simple as it goes. And that strategy is going to be around what I said earlier. It's going to be around abilities to surge, ability to pre-buy large items, ability to put together redundant. It's going to be a strategy, frankly, that will include co-production with our partners and allies overseas for our stuff and, frankly, some of their stuff in this country. And what's the content of the strategy is driven by a new cell that we put together called the JPAC, Joint Production Acceleration Cell. We're filling it with industrial base experts on production, including staffing it from the services, that are literally going through system by system and understanding the what ifs. They're not necessarily making the decisions, but if I want to know, or the secretary wants to know, for these 4 items, what would it take for us to double the production in a month for each one of those? They're going to come back and give us the answers and the cost for it. And then we're going to go back and work it with the Congress. It is a skill set we're having to build back in the DoD. This is not industrial policy. This is execution of an industrial strategy. And they're related, but they're not the same thing. And that's why we had to take this JPAC, because it's not only industrial policy, it's actually executing and doing the acceleration what ifs. And we put it organizationally directly reporting to me across all the ASDs. It's led by Dr. Aaron Simpson. And my goal is to get something like that started also for NATO, so that we together, and we all with our subject matter experts, can build the industrial base for NATO.
Thank you, sir. The next question comes from the audience here, and it has to do with emerging technology, specifically artificial intelligence. And there's 2 questions, and I'll try to combine them together. How are you incorporating AI, artificial intelligence, into your campaign strategy for acquisition and test and evaluation? And how do you expect acquisition professionals to use things like ChatGPT to more effectively do acquisition sciences?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Of course, it's a broad topic area that people can go on with a lot, and every day there's something in the news about this. I'll just go back to the first principles. Let's go back to let's start with the operational first principles, which is the kill chain. If the kill chain is detect, control, engage, and you break it into much more of its detailed systems, if you will, or capabilities. Think of a problem that's a real problem. Say a mobile target in a contested area that we have to take out with high degree of confidence. If I look across the detect, control, engage, where can artificial intelligence make a difference? And mostly what we're talking about is where artificial intelligence can do something maybe at scale that humans and relieve the human of stress and human of manual stuff. Well, I can tell you right now, we know it's on the detect side. Discovery at scale is what's been called that. We're going through our AI does a reasonable job, been shown by Project Maven, of going through volumes and volumes of, for example, video data from UASs, and with high degree of reliability, finding a certain type of truck in ways that would take humans days to do it. They can do it right very quickly. Now the caveat for that is it can be easily spoofed. So you have to make the AI algorithms be resilient. And AI, for all the talk about it, can be spoofed. And if you've seen some of the spoofing that's done, so it has to be watched carefully. Then there's the control aspect of it. If I detect an AI in control, if you argue control involves planning, matching weapons to shooter, and all the rest of it, maybe not the command part, but the control part, I think that's also rich for AI. Now, most of the stuff that I've seen where people are trying AI out on, say, weapons target pairing at large scale, it's still more about optimization and cranking optimization with high power computing than it is really about AI. They're still trying to figure out where does AI change the game there, but we'll figure that out. On the stuff that gets in the news a lot, which is the command part, I'll just quote the late great Ash Carter, one of my mentors, and he said, at least in the United States, a Secretary of Defense going to the podium in the press room here will not say, "Oh, sorry that we hit the school, the machine did it." Okay, so and this gets into all the AI ethics and all that. Doesn't mean other countries won't do it. We understand that. So detect, control, engage. The other pieces where AI can make a difference is on things like predictive maintenance, going through large data sets, finding patterns and other things. I think that's in its infancy. So I would encourage the acquisition workforce to look at the kill chain and where it makes a difference, and also make that it's resilient, that it can't be easily spoofed, and then look at things where large data sets can be gone through more quickly for patterns. With maintenance logistics is an example of that. So those are some things to say about AI. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This is a question from online, and it links the questions about industrial-based planning and production with small businesses. Can you talk about what initiatives ANS is doing with respect to innovation and encouraging small businesses to get more involved in acquisition programs?
Yeah, we're doing a lot in small business. We just put out a small business strategy, I think about 6 months ago, and it really was done with a whole of government approach. So we're working across the federal government on small businesses. Lots of things we're doing. There's a mentor protege program that we're doing where we're linking up new small businesses who are new entrants with folks that have been in the business for a while, teach them how to do work for this strange place called the DoD. We're also working very hard in the CIO shop to come up with quicker and cheaper ways to get small businesses accredited, particularly as you see CMMC coming along or the 800-171 NIST standards. We're also working to get below the primes, because remember, a lot of small businesses are subbed to prime contractors. So we don't always have the visibility there, but we're working with the primes to get underneath them and really see how we can more robustly help the small businesses. And then finally, we're encouraging the rapid contracting, the OTAs. The small businesses don't have the time to be waiting around for a year to get on contract. And again, what we're after for small businesses is we're doing it because we need more entrants in the game. We need more choices to be made. And I'd like to do even more direct government contracting to small businesses, not just rely on the subcontracting part as well. So there's a lot there. And I think with, it's also interesting to look at where the VCs are going, the venture capitalists, and where they're putting their money. And that's moving around a lot in the last year, partially because of interest rates. And we're following that very carefully to see where we can plug in when we see either some capital drying up or we can match up people to other investors. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This question refers to the fact that you mentioned the acquisition strategic kill chain, and this has to do with logistics. What improvements do you see, or what impact does the acquisition profession have in improving our challenges with contested logistics?
Yeah, it's well, again, going back to the Ukraine situation. Fortunately, the Ukraine situation, other than in Ukraine itself, is a very different situation that we might face for contested logistics than the Pacific. What we are doing right now is, first of all, there is an old saying which I think has been attributed to General Bradley, Omar Bradley, that says, amateurs study strategy, professionals study logistics. And whether he said that or not, whoever said it is really correct. What we're finding is, I knew this before from my previous experience, logistics itself is its own deep profession. And you can find deep acquisition expertise and deep logistics expertise, which also involves sustainment. You rarely find it in both in the same individual, because it's that rich of a profession. And what we're doing on logistics is Chris Lohman is our ASD for sustainment. Chris is doing a whole bunch of things. First of all, Chris is leading the whole logistics for Ukraine right now. But also at the same time, what we're doing is a whole bunch of exercises in the Indo-Pacific on contested logistics. And we're doing tabletops. We're wrapping up, and we're going to do another one this summer of an F-35 global logistics tabletop with all the partners and FMS cases. Because if you look at who has FMS cases for F-35, it's a lot of countries now. Finland has it. Switzerland is going to get F-35s. Germany's getting F-35s. Poland's getting F-35s. Same in the Pacific, Japan, etc., Singapore. Well, what we're doing is we're starting to do tabletops, and we'll do real exercises of setting up a contested logistics scenario where we're having to resupply, do the global parts, the fuel, everything else, the F-35s. And it brings with it all the logistics tails, the tankers, everything, and seeing if the IT systems will hold up, making sure they're cyber hardened. The other piece we're doing in logistics is we're adding authoritative data on logistics and all the metrics for sustainment, so that the department has a single look at that. We've now done that where we've got the same data and definitions of mission capable, for example, across all three services. We now have a centralized database called Ivana, which is part of the audited system we're trying to get to audit, where the services have to put all that data in live. And we're able to show a dashboard to the leadership here on the ready, and ultimately what the operational readiness is of each of these systems based upon all of those items. And of course, what we're finding is areas that are chronically underfunded, which is areas like spare parts and the rest. So there's a lot going on there. The other piece is we're rebuilding some of the organic depot capability. Not that we don't want to outsource, but our organic depots, we've under-resourced for years, and we're putting money back into those depots. So there's a lot going on there in logistics. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This next question has to do with the acquisition workforce, obviously the base of the acquisition system. How is ANS influencing or changing talent management to ensure we have the skilled and innovative workforce to implement the complex and challenging and changing challenges of the big A acquisition system?
Yeah, there's actually also a lot going on there. Let's start by saying broadly. Now we'll talk about acquisition workforce in a second. Workforce overall and the industrial base in both the government and in the private sector is pretty much the number one issue that we all have as leaders. It's getting a little better, arguably, but COVID showed it. We had every company I talked to that comes in here have stories about their turnover. Most of the companies, their voluntary turnover is double what it was pre-COVID. Particularly high attrition rates on people with experience of 1 to 2 years. The shipyards are really experiencing that. And it's in some cases, it's actually the biggest challenge for these companies. We have the same sort of issues that we want to make sure we're taking care of in the government. Spending a lot of time on making sure the next generation of contracting professionals are being brought in, are being mentored. Also DCMA, DCAA, and then of course, acquisition professionals themselves. And we're looking very closely at our attrition rates because we have to build the next generation of acquisition of professionals. And it spans all those areas. It spans contracting, cost estimating, engineering, risk management, et cetera. Jim Wolseley, who's the president of Defense Acquisition University, has completely transformed the education and training program for the acquisition workforce. And if you haven't gone and seen online all the courses and things that they put in kind of a new generation of training for the workforce, it's very, very impressive. Jim is also leading for the deputy and me a whole acquisition workforce innovation team that is part of trying to teach innovation into the acquisition workforce. And yes, there are ways you can teach it, and we're doing that. So there's a lot going on there. We have a lot more to do. I think it's probably all of us, if we could think about something that we all have on our plates in this community. We have to build the next generation of acquisition professionals, and we have to keep them, and we have to continue to make this a great field of work and expertise.
Thank you, sir. This question comes from online. While the DoD is planning for surge and logistics, America is on the verge of a national default. How does that factor into DoD planning, and what guidance are you contemplating for doing industrial base planning and contracting in general with our national budget challenges?
Well, the first thing we're doing is and maybe we can't do this enough, is communicating to everyone what will be affected. The CR is an example of this, but if you have the debt ceiling thing, what would be impacted? I just want to talk about CR, which is, you asked about the debt ceiling, but let me just talk about the CR for a moment. There's a statistic that I was in the deputy secretary's speech a few months ago, and I'm going to get it probably wrong here, but it's in the detail, but the broad point is made. Out in the last, I think it was 12 years that have elapsed in time, 3 to 4 of those years were during a continuing resolution. If you add up all the time we've been in continuing resolutions, mostly at the beginning of the fiscal years, sometimes not resolving them until April or March, it adds up to 3 to 4 years. I don't think if the China had the same thing, because you all know the restrictions when you're a CR. You can't do new starts unless you get a waiver, and there's very few waivers. You can't ramp up. Most of the time, the money doesn't flow out. We're usually obligating it at a slow rate, and everything's tentative. Imagine doing that for 3 to 4 years of the last 12 years in one contiguous block. We didn't do it in one contiguous block. We did it every year, more or less, except for 1 year. Imagine if the Chinese had done the same thing. I think we'd be in a much better place in the Indo-Pacific. So first of all, you have to ask yourself that question. The other piece of it is, I've actually looked at some of the munitions that have been very important in Ukraine. And they were ones that the ramp up to them was slowed down by the CRs in 2017, 2018, 2019 timeframe. They were specific munitions. So remind people this has real consequences. Now, and of course, with the debt ceiling situation, of course, it's that problem on steroids. So we can't separate the well-being of the U.S. military, our place in the world, and what's going on with Ukraine and Indo-PACOM. We can't separate that from our domestic budgetary process. They're inextricably linked, and we have to remind people of that.
Thank you, sir. And as this session comes to a close, we have 2 minutes. I'd like to offer any final closing remarks. We have one question maybe for your closing remarks. As a former commissioner of the 809 panel, are there any recommendations from that effort that you haven't seen adapted that you would like to see in your tenure as ANS?
I want to see portfolio management in the way the 809 panel envisioned it implemented, but that would take the PBBE reforms that we talked about. Portfolio management we're able to do right now is it's stuff we have control over, which is largely money that's in hand. Okay, what we really need to do the portfolio management as envisioned by the 809 panel is get that flexibility from on the budget from the Hill. That's what I'd like to see, and that would need to come out of some type of PBBE reform. So I think once we do that, then we'll be able to really move fast on these kill chains. That would be the one thing I would love to see. And I'm going to give some final remarks. Anyway, thank you for coming to the symposium. The research you do is impressive. We all read it. We get your newsletter. Shout out to Shell for a great job on the newsletter. You know, I'll probably whenever I'm done with this job, I'll probably be sitting back out there with you in beautiful Monterey. So, but in the meantime, just keep doing this great work. I know you got some great panels stood up, and the reminder is that acquisition is a profession and sustainment, and it takes real expertise. It takes engineering, contracting, sustainment, understanding warfighting operations, all of the above. It is not something you just do as a hobby. And I think this audience knows that. We just need to remind other people like that. So anyway, I'll stop at this point and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, sir.